For 50 years, the Thorne family built an empire based on a single terrible lie. The only one who knew that dark secret was Elara Vance, and they silenced her. Now, her son Ethan Hayes has discovered the shocking truth that he is the heir to the woman they destroyed. The Empire has retaliated with fire burning Ethan's last sanctuary to the ground. Armed only with crucial evidence in the unwavering loyalty of his dog, Koda, Ethan races toward the final hidden vault atop the remote Silver Peak. Will Ethan, the sole protector of the truth, succeed in uploading the evidence before the ruthless Dominic Thorne reaches him? Or will the mountain become the final grave for Elara's honor and her son? Discover the fate of Ethan and Koda in their final showdown. Before we continue this compelling story of courage and vengeance, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. The year was 2020, and the external world, with its spiraling headlines and ever-present digital noise, felt increasingly irrelevant to Ethan Hayes. He was 52 years old, a highly successful but self-exiled security expert. His work, a rigorous isolating cycle of anomaly detection and penetration testing, had taught him that the greatest threats were rarely the loudest. They were the ones that waited dormant deep within the system's architecture. His small apartment on the fringe of Cedar Ridge, Montana, was a fortress of silence. The only steady presence was the rhythmic, soft tread of Koda. Koda was a Belgian Malinois, powerful and lean, with eyes the color of burnt amber that never seemed to fully rest. Koda was more than just a companion. He was trained for personal protection and search and rescue, SAR, a disciplined shadow whose vigilance was absolute. Koda was not merely adopted. He was the carefully traced distant descendant of the protective guard dog Elara Vance had kept decades ago. A lineage maintained through a small specialized network of handlers, a bloodline of loyalty that seemed to transcend the years. This ancestry gave Koda an almost supernatural edge, a primal instinct that resonated with the forgotten past. On a Tuesday morning in late October, the chill had begun to settle into the valley. Ethan sat at his minimalist desk watching the thin light filter through the pines. He found it easier to observe the world through the glass than to engage with it directly. A crisp white envelope lay on the worn welcome mat inside his front door. It was unusually thick, embossed with a gold seal, Harrison and Lell, attorneys at law. Ethan frowned. Lawyers did not solicit men like him, men who actively worked to erase their digital footprints and lived by the mantra of low profile, no contact. Lie. Koda, who had been resting near the window, rose instantly. The dog didn't bark, but emitted a low, continuous grumble, a sound of deep, sustained suspicion that spoke volumes more than a sudden howl. Koda's ears twitched rapidly, processing the scent of the envelope and the silent promise of intrusion it carried. Ethan picked up the letter. The paper was heavy, smelling faintly of sterile office air and something ancient like dust trapped in velvet. He slid a thumbnail beneath the flap and carefully opened it. The contents were brief and formal. It informed him of the passing of Elara Vance and named him the sole surviving beneficiary and inheritor of her property, a cabin located high on Silver Peak, deep within the forest ridges. Elara Vance. Ethan had spent a lifetime trying to reconcile that name with the woman he had been told was his grandmother, a name associated with whispered disgrace, an unexplained disappearance, and a vacuum of truth that his adoptive family had always refused to fill. He was 52 years old, and now finally the past was reaching out. 3 days later, Ethan's truck climbed the treacherous gravel road toward Silver Peak. Koda sat in the passenger seat, not restless, but rigidly focused. The dog's eyes constantly scanned the dense pine forest, his posture reflecting the high alert status of an animal sensing a shift in its domain. The final stretch was barely a road winding through dense brush until the trees abruptly parted. The cabin stood alone beneath a steep granite cliff, tilted slightly with age, its chimney rusted. The silence here was different from the silence Ethan cultivated. This was a listening silence, heavy with memory. As Ethan cut the engine, the sudden quiet was jarring. He took a deep breath of the cold, pine-scented air. "Well, Koda," he murmured, his voice rough. "Looks like she finished her life exactly where she hid it." Koda leapt out and immediately began sweeping the clearing, moving with the practiced efficiency of a SAR dog. He ignored the porch and the door, focusing instead on the perimeter. Then, near the corner of the cabin, the dog stopped dead. Koda's low growl returned, his gaze fixed intensely on the wooden foundation. Ethan approached slowly, his gaze scanning the tree line, anticipating an external threat. But Koda was clearly focused inward on the cabin itself. The front door was stiff, groaning in protest as Ethan forced it open. The interior was shrouded in white sheets, preserving a tableau from decades past. The air was thick with the scent of dried wood, old ash, and time. Koda entered hesitantly, his nose working the air. He sniffed the furniture, the heavy curtains, and then near the old stone hearth, he stopped. Koda pressed his nose against the wood floorboards, then gave a sharp, authoritative scratch. He repeated the scratch, insistent, pulling Ethan's attention away from the dust and shadows. Ethan knelt. The floorboards near the hearth were darker, and his professional eye immediately noticed an irregularity. One plank was fractionally raised and slightly less weathered than the others. "You smell something familiar, old friend," Ethan whispered, laying a hand on the dog's firm shoulder. "Something from your great-great-grandfather's time." Koda whined once, a low, urgent sound, then backed away, giving Ethan room to work. Ethan retrieved a thin, strong utility knife from his coat. The nails holding the plank were set differently. Working with the meticulous precision he used to bypass high-level digital locks, he pried the plank free. It came away with a faint squeal, revealing a shallow, dark cavity lined with old waxed canvas. Inside lay a heavy metal box tarnished with the patina of decades. Ethan lifted it out. The box was sealed shut. He broke the seal and lifted the lid. The contents were wrapped in brittle yellowed paper. He unwrapped the first item, a small, heavy piece of metal, a bronze star engraved with a name he didn't recognize, but whose date, 1968, instantly resonated. Underneath the metal were tightly folded papers, but his gaze fell on a thin slip of paper, tucked between them, a handwritten note, its ink faded but still legible. They took everything, Ethan. The money, the truth, the name. They thought a ghost would stay silent. I told myself you were safer not knowing, but a man needs to know where his demons come from. I left you a debt, but I left you the weapon too. The Thorne family's empire is built on mud and lies. Trust no one carrying the name Thorne. Ethan sat back heavily on the dusty floorboards. The simple typed legal document had called her Elara Vance. But the note, the final words of a woman living in solitude, had used his name. It was personal. It was a declaration of war from beyond the grave passed down to him. He looked around the cabin, no longer seeing a ruin, but a fortress of defiance. He, a security expert who dealt in the cold logic of firewalls and algorithms, was suddenly holding tangible proof of a 5-decade-old conspiracy. And the target, the powerful Thorne family, was still very much alive and thriving just down the mountain. Koda patted over and nudged Ethan's hand firmly, then rested his massive head on the metal box. He didn't look at Ethan, but toward the door, his eyes fixed on the shadows that were beginning to lengthen outside. The quiet, listening silence of the mountain suddenly felt much closer. Ethan was no longer a reclusive expert. He was the inheritor of a dangerous truth. The cold, late afternoon light of 2020 bled through the grime-streaked windows of the cabin, illuminating motes of dust dancing above the metal box. Ethan ignored the chill of his mind already submerged in the data. For decades, his work as a security expert had involved finding the single corrupted variable, the overlooked line of code that brought down an entire system. Now he was applying the same forensic discipline to paper history and family secrets. He meticulously spread the contents of the box across the only clean surface, the old kitchen table, the bronze star, the cryptic note, and a small stack of fragile typed financial reports, many bearing the faded stamp, Confidential Project. Hope. Koda lay under the table, his head resting on his paws. Unlike the rigid focus he had maintained earlier, the dog was now calm, settling into the long vigil, as if recognizing that the immediate danger had passed and the intellectual battle had begun. Ethan started with the documents. The first pages were personnel rosters for a state initiative created after the devastating regional floods of 1968. The project was innocuously named Project Hope, a state-backed program meant to channel relief funds and construction contracts to rebuild the affected mountain communities. The documents confirmed Elara Vance's position financial manager Project Hope State Comptroller's Office. She wasn't merely a clerk. She held a position of trust and oversight. Ethan then moved to the accounting ledgers. These were not the official sanitized copies. These were detailed handwritten notes, Elara's precise looping cursive filling every page. Ethan, accustomed to decoding hexadecimal logs and firewall errors, found Elara's meticulous records to be a refreshing if alarming form of forensic accounting. He worked for hours tracing the flow of millions of dollars. The pattern was horrifyingly familiar. Funds diverted from veteran housing initiatives, construction contracts inflated by 200%, and disbursements routed through shell corporations whose ownership documents were cleverly hidden layers deep within public records. As Ethan connected the flowcharts drawing out the network of corruption on a legal pad he'd brought, one name appeared consistently at the terminus of every illegal transfer: Victor Thorne. Victor Thorne. At the time, Thorne had been the ambitious city councilman, later mayor, who championed Project Hope, leveraging the crisis to gain public support and political capital. In 2020, Victor Thorne was long retired, a revered figurehead, the patriarch of the state's most powerful corporate family. The ledgers clearly detailed how Elara Vance, sometime in the autumn of 1968, had found the discrepancies, copied the evidence, and prepared to go public. Ethan found a final heartbreaking entry on a fragile receipt dated just days before she officially disappeared from public records. They believed the disaster washed away all witnesses, but they forgot that not every paper trail leads to the bank. Some lead to the truth. I will not sign off on this. Ethan leaned back in the rickety chair, rubbing his eyes. Elara hadn't been a thief. She had been a whistleblower. She hadn't run. She had been forced into hiding to protect the evidence that could bring down the most powerful man in the region. She was 52 years old in 2020, and only now, after half a century, was her name cleared, at least in the eyes of her son. The digital analysis came next. Ethan plugged his encrypted satellite phone into a portable power unit, searching state property records and business filings for the Thorne corporate family. He ignored the media fluff pieces, the sanitized history, and drilled directly into the financial structure of Thorne Holdings. His security expert instincts screamed immediately. The Thorne empire was vast timber real estate energy. But the foundation of their entire operation, the original collateral for their first massive acquisitions in the early 1970s, was directly linked to the properties and cash flows established under the fraudulent Project Hope contracts. The antagonist's motive reinforced. The scale of the embezzlement was staggering. It wasn't just a few million, it was the entire seed fund of the Thorne empire. Ethan realized that if his evidence surfaced, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would trigger a cascading financial collapse. The current infrastructure mortgages, loans, and bonds were all predicated on assets that legally were acquired through theft. The entire Thorne corporate empire was financially fragile, built on and secured by the assets acquired through the 1968 crime. Its collapse would result from the truth surfacing. This explained the Thorne note perfectly. Elara hadn't just stolen documents, she had left a time bomb buried for the moment the family dynasty became too big to fail. The sun dipped entirely below the ridge, bathing the cabin in shadows. Ethan rose stiffly, the chill in the air suddenly noticeable. "They're not just guarding a reputation, Koda," he murmured, reloading his old reliable rifle, a necessary precaution given his line of work. "They're guarding their very existence." Koda, who had been motionless, lifted his head slightly, his gaze drifting toward the narrow, winding dirt road below. The confrontation arrived less than an hour later. Ethan was examining the cabin's primitive door locks, using his knowledge of physical security to identify weak points, when Koda gave a short, sharp bark, not a warning of immediate attack, but a definitive alert to an approaching vehicle. Seconds later, the sound of an engine labored up the gravel road, a powerful engine maintained meticulously. The sound stopped abruptly in the clearing. Ethan moved silently to the window, pulling aside a sliver of curtain. A sleek black luxury SUV, impossibly clean for a mountain road, sat parked 20 feet from the porch. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored, expensive coat that looked ludicrous against the rugged backdrop of the Montana mountains. His hair was silver, his face deeply tanned and lined, and his expression held a mixture of impatience and entitlement. Dominic Thorne. At 55, the son of Victor Thorne and the current CEO of Thorne Holdings, radiated cold, calculated power. Koda positioned himself silently between Ethan and the door, his body low, his breathing slow and controlled. Dominic Thorne didn't shout. His voice was smoothly modulated, carrying just the right note of practiced concern. "Mr. Brooks, Ethan Hayes, I saw the vehicle and was concerned about squatters. I believe this land may be pending an acquisition deal." Ethan unlocked the door, but did not open it fully, keeping Koda positioned strategically. "The property belongs to me, Mr. Thorne, as of yesterday. I am Elara Vance's heir." Dominic Thorne's practiced smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He began walking toward the porch, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. "Ah, the inheritance," Thorne said, sounding sympathetic. "A tragic loss. Elara was complicated. A footnote in our family's long history here in Cedar Ridge. That property is quite remote, Mr. Hayes. Difficult to maintain, dangerous even. Our corporation owns 90% of this ridgeline. Your small parcel is unfortunately right in the way of a major new development. I'm here to save you the trouble." Dominic Thorne was overly confident, leaning casually against one of the porch support beams, his posture demanding dominance. "I'm not interested in selling," Ethan stated flatly. Thorne chuckled a dry, dismissive sound. "Let's be realistic, Ethan. You're a city man. What would you do with a crumbling 70-year-old shack on a dangerous cliff? My offer will be extremely generous, more than fair market value. We can cut the check right now." "Not interested." Thorne paused, his smile fading completely. The transition was immediate and chilling. The practiced CEO vanished, replaced by the cornered predator. "Look, Mr. Hayes," Thorne hissed, dropping the pleasantries. "My grandfather built this town. My father expanded it. We are the foundation of this region's economy, and right now your inheritance is a nuisance. You seem like an intelligent man. You likely know that when a small piece of something gets in the way of something very, very large, that small piece usually gets crushed. Quietly." Koda took a single deliberate step forward, his low growl returning far more intense this time. The sound was not aggressive, but a promise of violence. Dominic Thorne glanced at Koda with distaste, his hand instinctively patting the side of his coat, perhaps checking for a concealed communication device or, more menacingly, a weapon. A nice animal. Thorne conceded, his eyes returning to Ethan, hardened now by desperation. You should train him to respect property rights. You have no idea what you've stumbled into up here. Walk away, Ethan. Take the money and let the dead stay buried." "The dead left me everything, Mr. Thorne, including the truth." Thorne's jaw tightened. The implied threat hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't give you a choice. This is my town, Ethan. Remember that." Dominic Thorne pivoted sharply, returning to his SUV. He didn't look back as he drove away, the powerful engine roaring down the gravel road, leaving behind a silence that was now filled with clear, undeniable hostility. Ethan closed the door and drew the bolt. He was no longer analyzing a cold case. He was inside the network, and the firewall had just failed. The counterattack had begun. The immediate hostility from Dominic Thorne had done more than just alarm Ethan. It had energized him. The confrontation validated every fragmented clue Elara had left behind. Ethan spent the rest of the night reinforcing the cabin's weak points, using materials he carried for his professional security setups, simple but effective measures that would buy him time. The next morning, the intellectual war resumed. Ethan searched the cabin, methodically focusing on areas Elara might have used for personal reflection rather than official storage. He found it tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the small, unused study, a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and pages yellowed, dated March 1968. Ethan finds Elara's journal, leading him to Sergeant Major Dale at a local assisted living facility. Elara's handwriting was elegant, yet sharp, recording not only financial entries, but her growing emotional isolation. She described the slow realization of Victor Thorne's treachery, the terror of knowing she held evidence that could dismantle a rising political dynasty, and the moment she understood that the public would never believe her over the esteemed Councilman Thorne. One entry dated October 1968 stood out. "They have taken my name, but they cannot take the proof. I am going now. Thorne's man Dale tried to reason with me, pleaded with me to be quiet for the sake of his pension. Poor man. He is a good soldier, not a bad one. He knows the truth. If I don't survive this winter, find him. He owes me an honesty he couldn't afford to give then." Sergeant Major Dale. The name was the thread Ethan needed. Using his satellite phone's limited signal, Ethan cross-referenced the name with local veteran registries and historical records. Sergeant Major Dale, retired Army Supply Corps, was still alive, residing at Silver Pines, assisted living 40 miles down the mountain near Cedar Ridge. The nursing home was clean, quiet, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Ethan left Koda securely kenneled outside the facility, knowing the dog's intimidating presence would be counterproductive here. He found Dale in a sunny room overlooking a manicured lawn. The man was in his early 90s, frail, his skin transparent over sharp bones, but his eyes, though watery, still held a piercing intensity when focused. "Sergeant Major Dale," Ethan asked, gently pulling up a visitor's chair. "My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm Elara Vance's heir." Dale's hand trembled, clutching the thin blanket over his lap. "Elara," he whispered the name, catching in his throat. "It's been 52 years. I always knew someone would come. I just always hoped it wouldn't be me they came for." Ethan showed him the journal entry and the bronze star. Dale's eyes filled instantly, not with fear, but with overwhelming pent-up grief. Atonement. Dale, now frail and consumed by decades of guilt, confirms Elara's story and provides Ethan with crucial supplementary evidence as his final act of atonement. "I failed her," Dale rasped, his voice thin. "I had the documentation, the signatures I saw where the payroll was diverted. But Thorne, Victor Thorne, he looked me in the eye and promised to strip my pension, ruin my wife's health insurance, leave us with nothing. I had 3 children. I was a coward." Dale's guilt was a palpable presence in the room, a sickness he had carried for half a century. "Elara told me I was saving my family, but I was selling her honor." He reached beneath his thin mattress and pulled out a small, worn ledger bound in canvas. It was heavier than Ethan expected. "This is mine," Dale said, pushing the ledger across the table. "My real inventory log, dates, times, names of the contractors Thorne set up, the proof she needed. I've kept it all these years hoping one day I could finish what I started." Dale collapsed back against the pillow, exhausted by the confession. "Tell her I'm so sorry. Tell her I finally did right." Ethan clasped the old soldier's hand. "I think she already knows, Sergeant Major. You did a brave thing today." Ethan left the assisted living facility, the weight of Dale's canvas ledger now added to the weight of Elara's trust. Dale's testimony combined with Elara's detailed ledgers was now an airtight case. He had Victor Thorne's signature on the false payroll and Dale's signature on the true inventory. Back at the lonely cabin nestled back into the silence of the mountain, Ethan found what he knew must be there, a personal message. It was hidden behind a detached backing plate of the old grandfather clock, a simple folded piece of paper thicker than the others. Ethan knew immediately this was the key. He sat down at the table, Koda resting his massive head on his knee, the rhythmic thump of the dog's tail the only sound. Ethan unfolded the paper. It was not a report or a log, but a letter written in the same elegant hand, the ink slightly faded. "My son, I wish I could tell you in person, hold you, and explain the silence of these years. I was not your grandmother. I am your mother." The emotional climax. Ethan discovers a final letter from Elara revealing she is his biological mother. She explains her decision to give him up for safety and that she watched over him from afar. Cues emotional complexity. "You were born in that terrible year just as Thorne's men began searching for me. They would have used you. They would have silenced me through you. Giving you up was the only way I could ensure two things: your safety and the survival of the truth. I chose anonymity for you so that you might one day choose life for yourself. I never stopped watching. I know you chose engineering, then security. I know you found Koda's ancestors' line. I know you are good, strong, and wise. I have been watching you, my son, when I could. The anonymity I created was my sacrifice. The truth I left is my gift. Forgive me for the absence, but know that you were never unloved. Your mother, Elara." Ethan stared at the words, the world narrowing down to the thumping of Koda's tail and the brittle paper in his hands. 52 years. Every unanswered question about his past, the strange adoption, the complete lack of family history, the quiet shame slammed into him at once. Ethan's resolve. Ethan processes intense anger and profound empathy, solidifying his mission not just to expose corruption, but to avenge and restore his mother's honor. He felt a blinding, fierce surge of anger at the cowardice of Victor Thorne, anger at the injustice that had forced a young woman to choose between her child and her integrity. But beneath the anger, there was a profound empathy for the silent, lonely life Elara must have led, watching her son grow up from the shadows, unable to claim him. His mission was no longer about solving a historical crime or defending property. It was personal. He was here to avenge his mother and restore the honor that had been stolen from her. The sense of solitary commitment that had defined his life as a security expert now found a genuine burning purpose. The final warning arrived via an unexpected medium, a small, sturdy, specialized plastic drive left prominently on the porch railing near Koda's kennel. It was the kind of drive Ethan recognized used for secure data drops. Ethan inserted the drive into his forensic laptop. It contained only one file, a short, high-resolution video clip of the cabin taken from a drone, time-stamped just moments after he had returned from the assisted living facility. The audio was a synthesized, distorted voice. "Sergeant Major Dale is a fragile old man, Ethan. You shouldn't upset him, and your mother always was too attached to her principles. It's time for you to learn the lesson she refused to. You may be Elara Vance's son, but you will never be a Thorne. We know who you are. Leave this mountain before you learn what your mother already paid for. Tanti. Thorne's escalation. Dominic Thorne sends a final aggressive warning revealing he knows Ethan's true parentage and is motivated by a deep-seated contempt for Elara's legacy. Dominic Thorne didn't just know about the records, he knew everything. The escalation was complete. It wasn't just a threat to his life. It was an attempt to dismantle his identity, fueled by the Thorne family's deep-seated contempt for Elara's defiance and the purity of her legacy. Ethan looked out the window. The cold moon was rising over Silver Peak. He gently placed his hand on Koda's neck. "They know, old friend," Ethan said quietly, his voice hard with resolve. "They know who she was, and they know who I am. And now, we fight." The threat was clear, personal, and absolute. Dominic Thorne knew the truth about Ethan and Elara Vance, and that knowledge meant the clock was running out. Thorne, driven by desperation and a deep-seated contempt for Elara's moral stand, would move swiftly and decisively. Ethan spent the next few hours in a state of hyper-focused calm. He had faced digital threats designed to crash entire networks, but the danger of fire and physical violence was simpler, more brutal, and infinitely more immediate. He gathered the key documents, Elara's ledgers, Sergeant Major Dale's inventory log, and the personal letter, and secured them in a rugged fire-resistant data sleeve. Koda, sensing the shift from analysis to action, stayed close. The dog's low growls were intermittent, now reserved for the sound of distant engines or the snap of branches that didn't sound like natural wind movement. As twilight bled into a dark, moonless night, the mountain air grew heavy. Ethan, watching the weather reports on his satellite terminal, noted the conditions. A heavy, damp fog was rolling in low, and thick, perfect cover for a hostile approach. Around Aura 100 hours, Koda gave the definitive warning, a sharp, intense bark directed at the window facing the access road. Ethan was instantly on his feet. He moved to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtain. Through the thick, swirling fog, he saw nothing but indistinct shapes of pines. But Koda's insistence was absolute. Then he heard it, the faint metallic scent of gasoline carried on a slight updraft. "Fire," Ethan muttered, his blood turning cold. "They're not subtle." Desperate action. Dominic Thorne orders the cabin to be burned down to destroy evidence and force Ethan off the mountain. A moment later, a dull orange glow pierced the fog to the south of the cabin. It wasn't natural light. It grew rapidly, followed by a sudden violent crackle, the sound of wood catching fire, fast. They had doused the old woodshed, aiming the blaze directly toward the dry timber of the cabin's foundation. "We have to move, Koda, now!" Ethan shouted. He grabbed the fire-resistant sleeve containing the evidence and pulled the rifle from its secure resting place. He knew fighting the blaze was futile. They had used an accelerant. Their only option was escape and survival. Ethan remembered Elara's primitive escape route, a small concealed trapdoor in the pantry leading to a crawl space that exited onto the steep mossy slope behind the cabin. It was a route meant for stealth, not a hurried, frantic retreat. Smoke was already beginning to seep in through the floorboards, bitter and stinging. The roaring sound of the spreading fire drowned out the night. Ethan lunged for the pantry, tearing away the wooden barrel used to disguise the trap door. He yanked the heavy timber door open, revealing the dark, narrow hole leading down. "Go, Koda, go!" Grainkrobro. Koda, ignoring the intense heat radiating from the floor, squeezed through the opening first. Ethan scrambled after him, dragging the evidence sleeve. He was halfway through the opening when the pressure change from the heat caused one of the front windows to violently shatter. A sheet of superheated air and debris erupted into the small kitchen area. Koda, already clear of the opening, instinctively turned back toward the sound. A splintered piece of timber propelled by the sudden explosion, flew directly toward Ethan's head. Ethan and Koda escaped the fire narrowly. Koda sustains a severe injury while protecting Ethan from the flame's debris. In a blur of protective instinct, Koda slammed his body against the interior frame of the opening, deflecting the timber just as it would have struck Ethan. The deflection saved Ethan from a severe concussion or worse, but the action pushed Koda directly against the exploding window frame. A jagged shard of broken glass, thick and heavy, sliced deep across Koda's left flank and upper rear leg. The dog cried out a single sharp sound of pain that cut through the roar of the fire before scrambling the rest of the way out. Ethan tumbled onto the wet earth behind the cabin, coughing and gasping for breath. He scrambled to his knees, his eyes adjusting to the orange glow now engulfing the old structure. He saw Koda panting heavily, struggling to stand. Blood, dark and viscous, was already staining the dog's tawny fur. "Koda, oh Koda!" Ethan rushed to the dog, tearing strips from his own heavy flannel shirt to staunch the flow. The wound was deep, severe, but not immediately fatal. The entire cabin was now engulfed flames, licking up the side of the cliff, casting monstrous flickering shadows across the landscape. The home Elara had chosen for her lonely exile, the last physical testament to her defiance, was gone. From the road below, the low, powerful rumble of an engine accelerated quickly, fading into the fog. Thorne's people were gone, confident that the blaze had done the job. Ethan worked feverishly, stabilizing Koda with field dressings from his security kit. The dog whimpered softly, but his deep amber eyes remained fixed on Ethan, loyal even in agony. As the worst of the flames subsided, leaving a smoking black skeleton, Ethan stared at the ruins. 52 years of truth sacrifice, and the only physical link to his mother, all reduced to ash and debris. The anger he had processed earlier now intensified into a terrifying singular clarity. The empathy was still there, but it was channeled into a focused, chilling resolve. The vow. Witnessing his mother's sanctuary destroyed and Koda injured, Ethan's analytical resolve transforms into a deep personal quest for vengeance and justice. He looked at Koda, whose breathing was shallow but steady. "You saved me, buddy." Ethan whispered the words thick with smoke and emotion. "You saved the truth." And they thought they could burn it all away. His analytical mind, the part that dealt in logical threats and countermeasures, took over, overlaid with the purpose of a man defending his only family. He was no longer just an inheritor. He was a warrior on a personal crusade. He carefully searched the edge of the clearing near the smoking foundation. Amidst the swirling ash and burnt timber, a piece of wood splintered by the fire lay exposed. Tucked beneath it, almost hidden, was a small, strangely shaped piece of stone. It wasn't stone, though. It was a wedge of corroded metal, perhaps part of the old foundation work Elara had added. Ethan picked it up. It felt deliberately placed. A small, faint indentation on the metal pointed upward toward the summit. He remembered the journal entries, the military context, and the high elevation of the area. He remembered the name, Silver Peak Summit. He pulled out the fire-resistant sleeve and retrieved Elara's journal. He turned to the final frantic pages. There, amidst the hasty notes about funds and dates, was a small hand-drawn map. It showed the winding mountain path, the location of the cabin, and a definitive X marked high above the tree line. Next to the X were 3 words almost obscured by smoke damage: bunker, summit, final. A charred piece of evidence directs Ethan to the final hiding place, an old military bunker on Silver Peak Summit. Ethan prepares his specialized secure communication equipment. The fire hadn't destroyed everything. It had merely activated Elara's final fail-safe mechanism. The ultimate hiding place was not in the cabin, but above it. Ethan looked at the summit, dark and imposing against the pre-dawn sky. He then looked down at Koda, whose flank pulsed with pain. He stabilized the dog again, securing the makeshift bandages. He then pulled out his encrypted satellite terminal and laid out his specialized data hardware, the powerful portable network transmitter and signal booster he used for deep field security work. He began checking battery life, prepping the robust file containing all the documented proof. He needed to get the signal out from the highest point possible. He was preparing not for an escape, but for a global data transfer. "We have one more climb, boy," Ethan murmured, strapping the rifle across his chest and gently securing Koda's heavy body to a padded harness, ready to carry his injured companion if necessary. "We finish this where she started it, and then we bring the Thorne Empire down." The climb was relentless. The path Elara had used was not a trail for hikers, but a deer track steep and treacherous, winding through rock scree and grasping roots. Above the smoke-stained ruins of the cabin, the air grew cleaner, thinner, and bitterly cold. Ethan moved with the grim determination of a man whose purpose had narrowed to a single point. He carried 2 heavy loads, the pack containing his satellite terminal and the critical data sleeve, and Koda cradled carefully in a makeshift chest harness. The dog's severe flank wound was crudely bandaged, and he whimpered softly with every difficult step. But Koda's head remained lifted, his nose occasionally nudging Ethan's jaw, a silent testament to his unbroken loyalty. Ethan, carrying his injured but resolute Koda, reaches the summit and the decaying military bunker. It took 2 exhausting hours to breach the tree line. As the sun began to crest the eastern peaks, casting long, sharp shadows, they reached a flat, windswept plateau. Before them stood the destination marked on Elara's map, a decaying, moss-covered military bunker, half swallowed by the earth. Its heavy steel door, rusted and scarred, bore a faded United States Army stamp from the 1960s. This was Elara's final. Ethan gently lowered Koda onto a thick patch of dry moss near a sheltering boulder. "Stay here, old friend," he whispered, running a reassuring hand over the dog's head. The bunker's lock mechanism was long gone, the door secured only by the immense rust of 5 decades. Ethan braced himself and shouldered the heavy steel. The door tore open with a screech that echoed across the quiet peaks. The air inside was stale and cold. Ethan activated his tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a short hallway leading into a main chamber. The chamber was not empty. It was meticulously organized. Against the far wall, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling, were dozens of metal containers, small, strong boxes sealed with industrial plastic, and bearing the faint familiar handwriting of Elara Vance. Ethan finds the original perfectly preserved documents stored in anti-humidity boxes, the ultimate evidence proving the Thorne family's multi-generational crime. Elara had understood that paper was fragile. She hadn't relied on luck. She had relied on her own diligence. Ethan opened the top box. Inside, documents and film reels were sealed in individual vacuum-packed anti-humidity sleeves. This was not the fragmented evidence of the cabin. This was the full multi-generational archive. Ledgers, canceled checks, land deeds, and most damningly original signed affidavits from witnesses Elara had interviewed before they were silenced or frightened off. The ultimate evidence preserved perfectly for 52 years. Ethan worked with manic speed, ignoring the cold. He pulled out his laptop and portable scanner, quickly digitizing the most critical files, the high-resolution scans of Victor Thorne's signed authorizations for fund diversion and the clear notarized copy of the 1970 land transfer that formed the bedrock of the Thorne Empire. Every file was automatically encrypted and added to the upload queue. He knew he was racing the clock, but he didn't anticipate how close Dominic Thorne was. The sudden metallic groan of the bunker door closing slammed the silence shut, plunging the chamber into darkness, save for the harsh glow of Ethan's laptop screen. A dry, amused voice cut through the stillness. "Looking for family secrets, Ethan." Ethan snatched his rifle, spinning around his flashlight beam, momentarily blinding. The light caught Dominic Thorne standing framed in the open doorway, a dark, imposing silhouette against the morning sky. Thorne held a semi-automatic pistol, its muzzle steady. "I knew you'd come up here," Thorne hissed, taking a slow step forward. "My father was obsessed with this place. He knew she had a fail-safe. Thank you for doing the heavy lifting." Thorne wasn't wearing his tailored coat. He was in rugged, dark clothing prepared for the environment. His face, usually controlled, was strained, etched with exhaustion and raw panic. Prior to confrontation, Dominic Thorne ambushes Ethan. Thorne acts erratically and personally due to the impending ruin of his empire. "It's over," Dominic Ethan stated, keeping his rifle leveled at the floor, buying time. "I have everything. Dale talked. The sheriff knows a warrant is coming." "Warrants mean nothing when the evidence is incinerated." Thorne snarled, his voice rising in pitch. "And who would believe the word of a paranoid old man in a nursing home?" "You made this too easy, Ethan. You're clever with your little computers, but you clearly have no idea how the real world works." Thorne took another step, but then hesitated, glancing at the laptop screen. "You know, when I found out Elara was your mother, I almost respected her. Almost. She abandoned her own flesh and blood to preserve a principle, but she chose wrong, Ethan. And now you're making the same mistake." His eyes drifted toward the data sleeve next to the laptop. "Pity. All that righteous anger, and you're still going to die in a moldy hole in the ground, just like the old woman wanted." Thorne's hand moved slightly, and Ethan noticed a small high-tech camera mounted on his shoulder, a subtle digital recording device. Thorne wasn't just here to kill him. He was here to stage the narrative, a struggle with a panicked heir who became violent, forcing the noble CEO to defend himself. "You won't get away with that," Ethan said, his voice cold. "I already have," Thorne spat, raising his pistol slightly. "This is Silver Peak, Ethan. Anything can happen here." At that precise final moment, a dark, injured shape exploded from the shadows outside the bunker door. Koda's defining sacrifice. Koda intervened, sustaining a critical injury, but not before achieving a dual purpose. 1. Creating a window for Ethan to fight. 2. Destroying Thorne's recording device, preventing Thorne from staging a self-defense claim. Koda, weak from loss of blood but propelled by an unyielding instinct, had dragged himself from the moss and launched toward Thorne. The sudden attack threw Thorne off balance, his pistol firing wildly into the ceiling. As Thorne cried out in pain and surprise, trying to shake the injured but ferocious dog off his arm, Koda did not target the gun. With a final desperate surge of strength, he snapped his powerful jaws onto the small, delicate recording device on Thorne's shoulder. The plastic shattered with a sharp crack. Thorne roared, throwing Koda violently against the stone wall. The dog landed hard, collapsing his breath, catching in a rattling gasp. Koda had sustained a critical injury, but the threat of the recorded narrative was gone. The instant Koda created the window for Ethan to fight, Ethan moved. He dropped the rifle, knowing the confined space made close-quarters combat faster. He lunged across the floor, driving his body into Thorne's midsection. The two men crashed against the stone boxes. Thorne fought with the desperate, flailing rage of a man watching his life's foundation crumble. Ethan fought with the cool, focused intensity of a man defending his only purpose left. Ethan, though older, used his professional training focusing on pressure points and disabling holds. He slammed Thorne's wrist against the bunker wall, forcing the pistol to clatter uselessly onto the concrete floor. Ethan subdues Dominic. He drove his knee hard into Thorne's ribs, pinning the gasping CEO against a box sealed with Elara's handwriting. "It's done, Dominic." Ethan growled, his own chest heaving. "Your narrative is over." He quickly retrieved the satellite terminal. Despite the struggle, the transmission status remained ready to upload. Ethan didn't hesitate. He hit the final confirmation button. The screen flashed, transmitting. The specialized terminal used high-frequency bursts to push the massive encrypted file to the pre-designated recipient, the Sheriff's Department mainframe, complete with time-stamped affidavits and digital signatures. He uses his specialized gear to transmit the encrypted file to the Sheriff's Department. Dominic is arrested. Thorne watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, his face draining of all color. When the status changed to upload, complete received, Thorne slumped, the fight draining out of him. The full weight of 52 years of corruption had finally crushed him. 10 minutes later, the faint distant sound of sirens, not from the town but from the county road below, began to echo up the mountain. Ethan knelt immediately beside Koda, cradling the critically injured dog, tears finally stinging his eyes. "You did it, boy," he whispered into the dog's ear. "You brought down the Empire. We finished it, Koda. We finished it." As the first sheriff's deputies cautiously approached the summit, they found Ethan Hayes holding his dying dog and the heir to the Thorne fortune, defeated and whimpering against a stone wall surrounded by the meticulously preserved evidence of his family's crimes. The truth hidden for half a century was finally free. 6 months had passed since the showdown on Silver Peak. The Thorne Empire, built on a foundation of deceit and stolen funds from 1968, had crumbled with astonishing speed. The digital proof provided by Ethan, backed by Sergeant Major Dale's testimony, and the physical records recovered from the bunker, had left Dominic Thorne and his father's legacy defenseless. The subsequent arrests triggered the very financial collapse Ethan had predicted, unraveling 52 years of corruption. For Ethan, the immediate aftermath was a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and profound, exhausting grief. But through it all, there was a steady anchor. Koda. Restoration. Koda recovers from its injury, symbolizing Ethan's own healing. Elara Vance's service record and honor are fully restored. Koda's recovery was slow and agonizing, but resolute. The dog had endured critical injury requiring intricate surgery and months of physical therapy. Ethan stayed by his side every small improvement, a tentative step, a stronger wag of the tail, mirroring the slow, deliberate process of healing within Ethan himself. The dog's unwavering commitment to survival became a visible symbol of Ethan's own difficult journey from isolation to purpose. Koda's eventual full recovery was not just a veterinary success. It was the symbolic restoration of the protective spirit Elara Vance had fostered. The biggest public triumph came 3 months after the arrests. In a quiet, formal ceremony at the state capitol, Elara Vance's official service record was formally exonerated. The state issued a public apology for the wrongful accusations of 1968. Her name, once whispered in shame, was now officially and legally restored, honored for her integrity and courage. Ethan stood alone during the ceremony, clutching the bronze star found in the cabin, feeling the silence of her lifetime of sacrifice finally lift. He had fulfilled his vow. With his mother's honor secured, Ethan turned his attention to her land. He retained the property on Silver Peak, now a scarred but sacred plot. The legal process yielded a substantial financial settlement from the liquidated Thorne assets reparations that Ethan was determined to use for their intended purpose. The living memorial. Ethan rebuilds the burned site into the Elara Vance nonprofit assisted living facility, a place of healing, not hiding, fulfilling his mother's true legacy. The goal was not to rebuild the cabin as a monument to loss, but as a living testament to Elara's principles. Ethan worked tirelessly with architects and local builders. He utilized the settlement funds, supplemented by community donations from those Elara's sacrifice, had indirectly helped to construct a new structure. It was modern, efficient, and welcoming, standing tall and proud where the old shack had once hidden the truth. The sign above the main entrance, carved from local pine, read, Elara Vance Non-Profit Assisted Living Facility. It was a deliberate choice. Elara's final act had been to protect the veterans and vulnerable people the funds were intended for. The facility would serve the community, offering long-term care for the elderly, particularly those veterans whose lives had been disrupted by the very wars and societal neglect Elara had fought to remedy. It was a place of healing, not hiding. Ethan, no longer needing to work as a security consultant, took on the role of facility administrator. He oversaw the final construction, his analytical mind now focused on optimizing care schedules and funding pathways. He had traded digital fortresses for physical compassion. One spring afternoon, Ethan stood on the newly built porch, watching the first residents move in. The sun shone brightly on the peak, and the smell of fresh lumber and blooming pine filled the air. He looked down at Koda, whose scars were now pale, proud lines beneath his tawny fur. Koda sat patiently tail, occasionally thumping the clean wooden deck, fulfilling his ancestral role as guardian of the space. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's head, looking out over the valley. He felt the absence of Elara, but no longer the grief of being abandoned. He had found his roots, confronted his demons, and in rebuilding his mother's home, he had finally found his own. The long silence was broken, replaced by the gentle rhythm of life beginning anew. Silver Peak was a place of refuge, just as Elara had always intended. The silence that finally settles over Silver Peak isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the profound sound of debts being paid, the debt of courage Elara owed to the veterans, and the debt of loyalty Ethan owed to his mother and to Koda. This story, then, is a quiet reminder that the deepest legacies we leave behind are not built of fortunes, but of fierce devotion and the unwavering choice to do what is right no matter the cost. If Elara's sacrifice, Ethan's determination, or Koda's faithfulness moved you today, please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Your reflections keep these true histories alive. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories of hidden honor, and click on our newest video appearing on screen now to discover another journey home. If this story interested you, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your city, your state, or your country. And don't forget to subscribe for more touching tales.